Isabelle Carter stood outside her parents' house. The warm glow of the porch light casting long shadows across the front yard. The air was thick with humidity. A typical Texas summer night. But inside her chest, a cold dread settled deep. She clutched the pregnancy test in her trembling fingers. The small pink lines staring back at her, confirming what she had feared, and, in some strange way, hoped for. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head. Maybe, just maybe, her parents would see beyond their rigid expectations and offer her the support she desperately needed. Maybe her mother, Diane Carter, would pull her into a tight hug and whisper that everything would be okay. Maybe her father, Richard, would sigh but ultimately stand by her, the way fathers were supposed to. But deep down, she knew better. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the front door open and stepped inside. The familiar scent of lavender and old books filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension she could already feel tightening around her chest. Her mother was seated at the dining table, perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a porcelain teacup, while her father read the newspaper, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Her older sister, Evelyn, sat beside their mother, scrolling through her phone, looking effortlessly put together as always. "You're late," Diane remarked without looking up. "I need to talk to you all," Isabelle said, her voice steadier than she expected. Her father glanced at her over his newspaper. "What's so urgent?" Isabelle took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The room went silent. Her mother's teacup clattered against the saucer, her eyes widening in horror. Her father slowly lowered his newspaper, his expression unreadable, but the tightening of his jaw said enough. Evelyn let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head like Isabelle had just announced she'd adopted a stray dog instead of something life-altering. "You can't be serious," Diane finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am," Isabelle said firmly. "I'm keeping the baby." Diane let out a sharp breath, as if the words had physically struck her. "Who's the father?" Isabelle's throat tightened. "Nathan," Evelyn scoffed. "Oh, of course. The mysterious, broke artist who conveniently vanished the second things got serious." "He didn't vanish," Isabelle snapped, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "Something must have happened." Richard set his newspaper aside, folding it with precision before resting his hands on the table. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a razor-sharp edge beneath it. "You're telling me that not only did you disgrace this family, but you don't even have the father around to take responsibility?" "Dad, you need to fix this," he interrupted. "You know what that means." Isabelle stiffened. "No." Diane stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You don't have a choice." "I do," Isabelle said, her voice growing louder. "I won't get rid of my child just because it doesn't fit into your perfect little world." "You're being selfish," Evelyn chimed in, her arms crossing over her chest. "Do you have any idea how this will look? Mom has spent years building her reputation at the church. Dad has business partners who trust him. And you're just going to throw all of that away?" "I'm not throwing anything away," Isabelle shot back. "I'm having a baby. My baby. That's not something to be ashamed of." Diane let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is about shame? It's about survival. Isabelle, you don't have money. You don't have a stable home. You don't even have a man standing beside you. What kind of life do you think you can provide for a child?" Isabelle's hands curled into fists. "I'll figure it out." Richard exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Then figure it out somewhere else." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. "What? You heard me." His voice was emotionless, like he was discussing business. "If you refuse to do the right thing, then you are no longer welcome in this house." Diane nodded in agreement, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Pack your things. You can leave tonight." Isabelle's breath caught in her throat. "You're actually kicking me out?" Evelyn shrugged. "Actions have consequences." For a moment, she stood there, hoping, praying, that one of them would change their mind. That her mother would soften. That her father would relent. But all she saw was cold resolve. "Fine." She lifted her chin, refusing to let them see her cry. "I don't need you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I'll build a life on my own." Diane sighed, looking away as if she couldn't bear the sight of her own daughter. Richard simply picked up his newspaper again. As if the conversation was already over. Evelyn gave her a pitiful smirk. Without another word, Isabelle turned on her heel and walked toward the staircase. Her mind racing. She had no plan, no backup, nowhere to go. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going to beg. She was going to survive. Isabelle packed her things with hands that trembled. But not from fear, at least. That's what she told herself. Anger burned hotter than the sting of betrayal, fueling every movement as she shoved clothes into her suitcase. She grabbed the framed photograph of her and Evelyn from years ago. Before things had soured, before expectations had driven a wedge between them. For a brief second, she considered taking it, then she tossed it onto the bed and zipped up her bag. Downstairs, the hushed murmurs of her parents and sister carried through the halls. She knew they wouldn't come up to stop her, wouldn't try to talk her out of leaving. They had made their choice. And now, she was making hers. She took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. Suitcase rolling behind her. Her mother stood near the staircase. Arms crossed, lips pursed as if she had something to say but thought better of it. Her father didn't even look up from his newspaper. Evelyn leaned against the front door. Her expression unreadable. "So, where are you going?" she asked. Her voice almost casual. Isabelle tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. "I'll figure it out." Evelyn's lips curled into a small, almost smug smile. "Good luck with that." Isabelle ignored her, stepping past her sister and pulling the door open. The summer night air was thick and warm, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. The reality of the moment settled in. She was truly on her own. She squared her shoulders and walked down the front steps, not bothering to look back. By the time she reached her car, her hands had stopped shaking. She threw her suitcase into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. Exhaling shakily, her bank account had just enough for a couple of nights at a cheap motel. But after that, she had no idea. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Most of the names were useless, people she'd drifted from, friends who were more acquaintances, co-workers who wouldn't understand. Then, her finger hovered over one name. Lena, her best friend, or at least, she had been before life got in the way. Isabelle hadn't seen her in over a year. Not since Lena moved to Austin for a new job. But if there was anyone who wouldn't turn her away, it was her. Heart pounding, she tapped the name and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then a groggy voice answered. "Isabelle? It's almost midnight." Isabelle swallowed, trying to keep her voice even. "Hey, Lena, I need a place to stay." There was a pause, and then a rustling sound. Like Lena was sitting up in bed. "What happened?" Isabelle let out a shaky breath. "I'll explain when I get there. If that's okay." "Of course," Lena said immediately. "I'll text you my new address. Just drive safe, okay?" Relief flooded through Isabelle so fast she almost choked on it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," Lena said softly. "I'll see you soon." As soon as the call ended, a text popped up with an address. Isabelle entered it into her GPS and stared at the screen. It was a 3-hour drive to Austin. Long, but not impossible. With one last glance at the house she had once called home, she shifted the car into drive and pulled away. The streetlights cast long shadows as she drove past familiar landmarks, her old high school, the diner where she and Evelyn used to eat after Sunday church, the park where she had learned to ride a bike. She wasn't just leaving a house. She was leaving a life. But as she merged onto the highway, heading toward a new city, a new future, she realized something. She wasn't just running away. She was running towards something better. By the time Isabelle pulled into Lena's driveway, the exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. The 3-hour drive had felt endless. The glow of the dashboard clock marking each passing minute like a slow countdown to a reality she wasn't ready to face. But now, as she cut the engine and sat in the silence of her car, the weight of everything hit her at once. She had no home, no job, no real plan, and yet, for the first time in years, she felt free. The porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow over Lena's small but inviting house. The front door opened, and there she was. Lena, dressed in an oversized hoodie and pajama pants. Her blonde hair piled into a messy bun. Isabelle barely had time to unbuckle her seatbelt before Lena jogged down the steps and wrapped her in a tight hug. "You're freezing," Lena murmured, pulling back just enough to look at her. "Come inside." Isabelle let herself be led inside. The warmth of the house instantly comforting. It smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry, so different from the cold sterility of her parents' home. Lena closed the door behind them and turned, arms crossed. "Okay, spill. What happened?" Isabelle sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I told them I was keeping the baby." Lena's eyes widened. "And they threw me out," Isabelle said simply. A flash of anger crossed Lena's face. "Are you kidding me? Your own parents?" Isabelle let out a hollow laugh. "You know them. Appearances over everything." Lena shook her head in disbelief. "Unbelievable. I swear, I always knew Evelyn was a snake. But your parents." She exhaled sharply. "I'm so sorry, Izzy." Isabelle forced a small smile. "I should have seen it coming." Lena grabbed her hands, squeezing tightly. "You did nothing wrong. And you're not alone, okay?" The lump in Isabelle's throat grew. She had spent the last few hours feeling like the world had swallowed her whole. But standing here, in the safety of Lena's home, she realized she wasn't drowning. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Isabelle admitted quietly. Lena gave her a look. "You're going to stay here as long as you need. No arguments." Isabelle blinked. "Lena, I can't." "You can," Lena interrupted firmly. "I won't let you struggle on your own. And besides," she grinned, "I could use a roommate. Rent's cheaper that way." "Despite everything," Isabelle laughed. "You're impossible." "I know." Lena nudged her toward the hallway. "Come on. I set up the guest room for you. Get some sleep." As Isabelle lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she thought about the life she had left behind. She had no idea what came next. But for the first time in a long time, she believed she had a chance to build something new. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the guest room window, pulling Isabelle from a restless sleep. For a moment, she lay there, disoriented, caught between the weight of yesterday's heartbreak and the uncertainty of today. Then, the scent of coffee and something sweet drifted through the air, and she heard Lena humming softly from the kitchen. Pushing aside the blankets, Isabelle sat up. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, feeling the faintest curve beneath her sweater. She wasn't showing yet, but she knew, deep down. She already felt different. She was a mother now. And she needed to start acting like one. When she walked into the kitchen, Lena was flipping pancakes, her hair a wild mess and her phone propped up against the toaster, playing an old Taylor Swift song. "Morning," Lena said without looking up. "I made pancakes. And before you argue, yes, you're eating. You're growing a human. And I will personally fight you if you skip breakfast." Isabelle smiled. "I wasn't going to argue." Lena turned, raising an eyebrow. "No sarcastic remark? No insistence that you don't want to be a burden?" She placed a plate in front of Isabelle and slid into the seat across from her. "Who are you? And what have you done with my best friend?" Isabelle picked up a fork and smirked. She had a long night. "Give her a second." Lena grinned before growing serious. "So, what's the plan?" Isabelle swallowed a bite of pancake. Considering her words, "I need a job. And I need to find a doctor. I haven't had a checkup since I found out." Lena nodded. "Okay, I can help with that. You've already done enough." Isabelle started, but Lena cut her off with a glare. "Stop. You know I want to help." Isabelle exhaled, nodding. She wasn't used to accepting kindness without guilt. Lena clapped her hands together. "First things first. I have an idea. It's not glamorous, but my boss is hiring at the cafe. It's part-time, but it's something." Isabelle hesitated. She hadn't worked a day in her life. Her parents had always made sure of that. But that life was gone. She had to start over. "I'll take it," she said. Lena beamed. "Good. You start tomorrow." "Wait. What?" Isabelle blinked. "I already texted him. Told him you were perfect for the job." Isabelle groaned, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "You're ridiculous. I prefer the term, efficient." As they ate, the weight of everything still loomed in the back of Isabelle's mind, her parents' rejection, the uncertainty of her future, but for the first time, She felt like she had a direction. And maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. The next day, Isabelle stood outside the cafe, her hands gripping the straps of her borrowed purse. The sign above the door read, Maple and Brew. And through the glass, she could see the morning rush in full swing, baristas moving quickly behind the counter, customers scrolling on their phones while waiting for their drinks. The air filled with the rich scent of coffee and warm pastries. She exhaled slowly. This was it, the first step. You got this, Lena whispered beside her, giving her an encouraging nudge. Just remember, smile, be polite, and don't drop anything. That last one's the hardest. Isabelle laughed, the sound more nervous than amused. Noted. Lena pushed open the door, leading her inside. Chris, she's here. A man in his mid-30s looked up from behind the espresso machine. His apron was stained with coffee, and his expression was somewhere between exhausted and amused. So, you're the mystery friend, he said, wiping his hands on a rag before extending one toward Isabelle. Chris, owner, head barista, and unofficial therapist to half the regulars. Isabelle shook his hand. Isabelle, cool, let's get started. Ever worked in a cafe before? No, she admitted. Chris nodded, not looking surprised. All right, trial by fire. Then, follow me. For the next few hours, Isabelle was thrown into a world of coffee orders, register buttons, and trying not to spill lattes on herself. It was overwhelming, chaotic, and completely foreign, but it wasn't terrible. She fumbled, of course. Nearly gave a woman almond milk instead of oat. Forgot to start the blender for a smoothie. And almost tripped over the mop bucket in the back. But every time she made a mistake, Chris just laughed and Lena gave her a thumbs up from across the counter. By the time the lunch rush died down, Isabelle was exhausted. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter as Chris handed her a water bottle. Not bad for a first day, he said. Most newbies spill something within the first 2 hours. You lasted 4, she smirked. High praise. Chris chuckled, then grew serious. Lena told me a little bit about your situation. You don't have to explain anything. But if you need flexibility, I'll work with you. Isabelle's throat tightened at the unexpected kindness. Thank you, she said softly. Chris just shrugged. Everyone's figuring stuff out. Might as well help each other where we can. For the first time in weeks, Isabelle felt something settle inside her. Maybe she was still lost. Maybe she was still terrified. But at least she wasn't alone. That evening, Isabelle sat on the small balcony outside Lena's apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. A warm cup of tea sat between her hands, the steam curling into the cool night air. Her body ached from standing all day. But it was a good ache, a reminder that she had done something. Contributed something. Instead of just drifting, Lena stepped outside and plopped down next to her, handing over a small plate with a slice of lemon cake. First paycheck tradition, she said. Well, technically, it's not a paycheck yet. But you survived day 1. So close enough. Isabelle took the plate with a grateful smile. If this is the reward, I'll gladly keep working. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Lena nudged her lightly. Be honest. How did it feel? Isabelle exhaled slowly. Overwhelming. Terrifying. Like I was constantly one step away from breaking something or getting an order wrong. Lena winced. That bad? A small smile tugged at Isabelle's lips. But, also kind of freeing. I was too busy keeping up to worry about everything else. Lena nodded. That's how it starts. Work is the best distraction when your life is a mess. But the real trick is figuring out what you actually want. Not just what keeps you busy. Isabelle turned that over in her mind. Want. It had been so long since she thought about what she wanted. Her life had always been about making others happy, her parents, James, society's expectations of who she should be. But now, she was free. Terrifyingly, beautifully free. I don't know what I want, she admitted. For the first time, there's no plan. No next step already mapped out for me. Lena grinned. That's the fun part. You get to make it up as you go. Isabelle let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You make it sound easy. It's not, Lena said. But it's worth it. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the distant sounds of city life up to the balcony. Isabelle wrapped her hands tighter around her mug, feeling the warmth seep into her skin. Maybe, just maybe, she could figure this out. Over the next few weeks, Isabelle settled into a new rhythm. Each morning, she woke up before sunrise, tying her apron over her borrowed work clothes before stepping into the warmth of the cafe. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and buttered croissants became her morning soundtrack. And for the first time in her life, she felt grounded, tired, but grounded. She learned quickly, memorizing orders, adjusting to the rush, and even managing to laugh at herself when she made mistakes. The regular customers began to recognize her, offering small smiles and occasional words of encouragement. "You're getting better," a man in a navy suit told her one morning as she handed him his usual black coffee. "Last week, you gave me tea by accident." She chuckled, grateful for his patience. "I'm improving, slowly." But the biggest change wasn't in how she moved behind the counter. It was how she moved through the world. One evening, as she wiped down the cafe tables, her phone buzzed on the counter. Nathan. She stared at the name on the screen, the past pressing down on her chest. She hadn't spoken to him since she walked out of that hotel. A part of her expected him to show up, to fight for her, to demand an explanation, but he hadn't. And now? She hesitated for only a second before silencing the call. Lena watched from behind the register, a knowing look in her eyes. "Not ready to face that yet?" Isabelle shook her head. "No, and I don't think I ever will be." Lena tossed a dish towel over her shoulder. "Good. You don't owe him anything." And for the first time, Isabelle truly believed it. That night, she walked home feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of her past was still there, but it was no longer crushing her. It was just part of her story, one she was learning to rewrite. Isabelle sat by the window of her small apartment, a cup of tea warming her hands as she gazed at the city lights. It had been months since she left Nathan behind, and every day since had been a slow but steady climb towards something that felt like peace. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message. "Nathan, I'm in town. Can we talk?" Her breath hitched. She stared at the words, fingers hovering over the screen. She could ignore it. She could pretend she never saw it. Or, she could face him one last time. The decision came faster than she expected. "Me. Tomorrow. Noon." The cafe. The next day, Isabelle stood behind the counter, her apron neatly tied, hands steady. When the bell above the door chimed, she knew before even looking up. Nathan stepped inside, looking almost exactly the same, sharp suit, confident posture, but there was something different in his eyes, a hesitance that hadn't been there before. She exhaled slowly, preparing herself. "Coffee?" He nodded, sitting at the corner table, the same place where he had once watched her from a distance. But today, she wasn't that woman anymore. She placed the cup in front of him and sat down across the table. "Say what you came to say." Nathan took a deep breath. "I made a mistake." She folded her hands. "Waiting. I let you go without fighting for you. I thought I was giving you space. But really, I was scared. Scared of what it meant if you actually left me behind." He looked at her, searching her face for something, anything, that might give him hope. "But I miss you, Isabelle, and I wanted to see if there was a way back." Her heart clenched, but she had already made peace with this moment long before it arrived. She smiled, not out of regret, not out of longing, but out of understanding. "Nathan, I don't hate you. I never did." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "But we can't go back." The words were gentle but firm. And final. Nathan swallowed, nodding slowly. "I had a feeling you'd say that." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand once before pulling away. "I hope you find happiness, Nathan, truly." His lips pressed together in something that almost resembled a smile. "You too." And with that, he stood, leaving the cafe and, finally, leaving her past where it belonged. Isabelle let out a slow breath, a sense of clarity settling over her. She had faced her past and walked away, not with bitterness, but with freedom. That evening, she closed the cafe alongside Lena, the two of them locking up for the night. "What's next for you?" Lena asked as they walked down the quiet street. Isabelle thought about it for a moment, then smiled. I don't know. And for the first time in my life, I think I'm okay with that. Lena grinned. Then let's celebrate. First rounds on me. As they disappeared into the night, laughter trailing behind them, Isabelle knew this was just the beginning. Not of another love story. Not of another chapter she didn't choose. But of a life that was finally, truly hers. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength comes from knowing when to walk away. Isabelle didn't just leave behind a broken relationship, she reclaimed her independence, her confidence, and the life she truly deserved. Instead of letting betrayal define her, she chose growth, self-respect, and a future filled with new possibilities. What do you think about Isabelle's journey? Comment 2 if you loved her decision and 7 if you would have chosen a different path. And if you enjoy these incredible Reddit stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Reddit Story for more powerful tales.